Definitely. It was based on the NY, Buffalo, Hazelum. It's tall, it's impressive, and we wanted the player to feel really weak and small compared to it. So it was definitely a good idea to go with that one.
I mean, it always starts as a collaboration. It's usually about 6 or 7 people from the core of the team, and people just start throwing out ideas. When you pitch something and people start groaning and laughing, when we came up with Gluskin, just like the reactions to that were so visceral in the room. It just felt like there was obviously a lot of room to run with him.
Of course, you have characters like Nick and Laird, who are 2 characters in one, holding a bow and arrow and a lantern, and that is kind of its own challenge unto itself.
I remember pitching Nick and Laird in Outlast 2, and that one was another one where people were just like, yes, absolutely.
But really, everything starts with the inspiration of, Phil, Chateau, JT, and Hugo, and we try to run with it as best as we can. It starts with their imagination and their words. It comes down to the character department, and their art helps inspire the animation. The sound helps inspire the animation, and the atmosphere of the game helps bring all of that into focus. So it's hard to say, because everything that makes these characters what they are, even when it comes down to just me, is really a collaborative and integral, iterative process that every character has its own challenges and has its own rewards.
Murkoff is definitely a creature of the 20th century, right? I think of Murkoff as like the most concrete sort of nugget at the center of all of the sort of secret corruption. Like all of our comforts in the Western world seem to rely on a lot of fairly evil shit that we try not to look at too closely, just to kind of get through the days. And Murkoff is like a nice way to focus all of that stuff. We're going to get a lot more of the earlier days of Murkoff in the trials, and we're sort of talking now about how much we're going to reveal about I've got a notion in my head of when the corporation starts and what it is and how that changes through the history of the early 20th century. But it's about as specific as I'm going to get now. It's not G.I. Joe, right? Like they're not Cobra. They're a company, and Murkoff wants to make money. And like, if you're going to do that as a pharmaceutical / military intelligence adjacent company, you're going to get up to some pretty grifty shit, right?
So the inspiration for Outlast came from a very wide variety of influences. We basically borrowed anything that we felt could be useful in the context of horror. So a lot of the ideas obviously come from horror movies, but not just horror movies. There's not like one specific reference like that's the main. Obviously, I mean, there's Amnesia: The Dark Descent that was a huge influence, but not necessarily for game design stuff, but just as a proof of a concept in terms of business model. Because there were very few horror games at the time, and most of them were indie titles, and so it allowed us to do meetings with investors. Yeah, Amnesia: Dark Descent was a big influence, but actually more for business reasons than game design. And then everything else is just like bits and pieces from all over the place: books, movies, other games. So I couldn't like point in one direction specifically. Probably my biggest influence, although to be honest, at the time I was not really realizing it, but it's Clive Barker. I read a lot of Clive Barker novels in my 20s. I kind of forgot about it, but then while we were doing Outlast 2, somebody mentioned Clive Barker, and I was like, Well, yeah, now actually a lot of the things I was pushing for started making more sense, because I realized that a lot of these things were coming from the Clive Barker style, just his style of horror, very edgy and wanting to put people in bring them in very uncomfortable places.
It's there's every chance I'm going to get hit by a bus tomorrow. Like I'm not sure what's coming down the line. But I've certainly got notions about it. But we'll see. All of the ideas about like what Miles' experience of the world post Outlast 1 is like all of my favorite philosophical shit. And you can get into like questions of artificial intelligence and octopus neurology and just like all of this. As soon as you're getting into sentient networked intelligence, like it becomes really hard. And I'm like not even a person who believes in sentience itself entirely. So the short answer is that you probably won't get a good answer out of it.
Okay.
The baby, is he real?
Of course, it's in the video game. Why isn't it real?
Is he? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like the second half of that question is the best answer to that question, right? That Billy and Miles are both still alive and taking over ants is kind of like how I would explain what the Wall Rider is. It's all of us trying to imagine what the experience of a networked intelligence is, or what artificial intelligence would think. Like the whole reason I chose ants is that I think ants are a really interesting experiment in terms of like what sentience is. And there's a lot of smarter people than me who have written and thought about this, but like, the notion that ants as a group of a million are one organism that makes decisions and chooses and strategizes and does things that we consider sentient also do. I don't know. There's a lot of examples in nature. If I could express it more eloquently, I wouldn't have to put it in a video game, maybe. But AI is a weird term. But I would say that the Wall Rider is as sentient as you or I are. But I don't entirely trust your sentience or mine. I mean, the Wall Riders, it's a cloud of nanobots biologically generated out of suffering and nightmares. Right, and its inception was based in sort of old Germanic mythologies, and was then further corrupted by grossness of military intelligence and capitalism. So it can eat things, but not consume them. That's the last page of the last issue of the first run of the Murkoff report. I don't know how to answer that question without sounding like an asshole, right? Like it's sort of writing a grad school paper on something I wrote. And the whole notion of the comics was to tie together those first two Outlast games and sort of show a little bit more of the connective tissue that we were talking about kind of below the surface there. It's a poetic flourish, like it's even. You study the way the Bible sort of came together, like it is cobbled together from a lot of different spiritual ideas that are kind of spiritual interpretations of the same notions, and it kind of pulled these traditions together, right? If you ask people what the Holy Spirit's role is in Christianity, like you'll get 19 different answers, right? And the notion of the Trinity is super interesting. It was something that we kind of talked about a decent amount in terms of the whole like Miles Wall Rider thing. It's a squishy question. I'm not sure.
No, Eddie is not half French. Inspiration was not based on a specific character. It was more, what do we need this character to do to create the sequence we want to have in the game, and then how do we build and create his personality and his traits so that it fits what he needs to be doing. I believe that you're defined by your actions. So I guess in this case, we came up with the actions first, what we want that character to be doing, and then we worked his personality and profile to justify the actions we needed.
The twins are definitely, they were patients in the asylum. And Father Martin's a charismatic guy, right? If you're looking to manipulate people with spirituality, aiming at people with mental illness is probably not an unprofitable way to go. The twins became under the thrall of Father Martin when they were all patients, right? Like it's sort of like they met once they were inside of there, and he kind of pulled them into his radius. But yeah, I think he's a talking guy. I don't think he's writing that much down outside of what he writes on the walls. Cults are all over the Outlast games, and I feel like that's a lot of. I mean, like we're doing this because we're 10 years in, right? We've been doing these for 10 years. The thing that I've seen over and over in the last 10 years is that everything is becoming a cult, right? That like you used to be able to have a conversation with somebody who was like a fan of, be like, yeah, I liked all of this except I didn't like that. And now you say that and you're talking to somebody who's in a cult who like bites your head off. And the same thing about politics, same thing about religion. It's like everything in the world is a cult now. And I feel like that's what we've always been talking about with Outlast. It's just that like everything eventually becomes a cult. If Frank Minera wasn't crazy, first of all, crazy is not a great term to use. But I don't think he'd be a musician or a cook. I don't imagine him as especially musical. I could see him more of a God, if he was in New York in the early 80s, he would have been a performance artist. Like he would have loved that kind of physicality. I think cooking for him is probably something more that he would want to do as an amateur, because it's more about the passion than the profession of it. I mean, and Rob Zombie, everybody who makes horror are all unbelievably sweet people. Like when I've seen Rob Zombie in Los Angeles a couple times, and it's always at a vegan restaurant, so I don't think he's a cannibal. I don't know. I kind of imagine Frank Minera would want to do something really, really just like physical and focusing. I could see him being a yoga instructor.
I'm gonna be cheesy and go with Traeger. I mean, it's the best character. Why am I speaking in English? I fooled you all, guys. I can't speak in English.
I really like Traeger. It's mostly because like me, we're kind of tall, we're skinny, we're weird, and we're both sarcastic. So it's me without the scissors.
Traeger has got the best quotes. Everybody remembers his quotes. We speak as Traeger all the time in the studio. He's got the best cutscene. We got the finger cuts. Like, I mean, yeah.
I mean, honestly, probably the characters I have the most fun writing are the Pauls from the comics. Inside the games, I mean, I've always felt very sympathetic towards Chris Walker, and I kind of like how little opportunity he has to express himself, but how much he wants to do the right thing. The characters who just have a lot of fun shit to say, like Val in the second one, or Gluskin. Like anytime you're typing, I watched my father fuck your god to death or whatever, like it's a fun day at work.
Moi, je dirais que c'est le groom. J'aime le contraste de ce personnage-là. Il y a plusieurs facettes à sa personnalité, s'il y a peut-être même plusieurs personnalités, parce qu'il veut il veut créer quelque chose, mais il est dégueulasse en même temps, puis il est propre d'un autre côté. Il veut bien paraître, mais c'est pas beau ce qu'il fait. C'est un personnage qu'on voit pas très longtemps, mais qui m'a quand même marqué, je dirais. Ouais.
I guess I would have to say Eddie as a character. Yeah, Eddie, but a close second is actually Blake in Outlast 2. His whole arc was something very fascinating to create. In terms of enemy, it would be Eddie. But overall, I think the arc we created for Blake in Outlast 2 was interesting as well, and it was sometimes uncomfortable to do, but also creatively a fun challenge.
It has to be Chris Walker. Do you want me to say why? It was the first character, when I came on Outlast 1, it was one of the first characters I did a fatality for, and my mission was, growing up as a kid, the most violent game we had around was Mortal Kombat, and Sub-Zero's head rip fatality was like the most gruesome thing in the world. And when you have a character like Chris Walker, and you have an instruction from your bosses of please decapitate the player, it's just like, thank you, I get to do my dream of outdoing what I think is outdoing sort of my little gruesome, brutal benchmark, and being able to rip the player's body off of his head as Chris Walker was like, this is my favorite character. He's big, he's hulking, he's the ultimate enemy, and he rips your body off from you, so that's why he's my favorite character. He allowed me to do all these violent things and become an outlet for just kind of fun and scary stuff.